Welcome to the E-Show with Neil Ravin. Founded in 2013, the EHL has become the college placement leader on the East Coast. Sit back and learn more about the next step in your junior hockey career.
Welcome to the E-Show, presented by the Penalty Box Foundation. The Foundation's mission centers around their daily motto: we take care of our own, as they help out all of those within the hockey community who've experienced a catastrophic event. Learn more at penaltyboxfoundation.org. What's up? My name is Neil Ravin, and this is episode number 168 of the E-Show. On this week's episode, we highlight the program with the longest history in junior hockey, the New York Apple Corps. Jake Basile connects with Lenny Caglianone following his first season coaching in the EHL. Caglianone is a former player in the league as he served as the captain on the blue line for the New Jersey Rockets back in the inaugural season of the EHL. The native of New Jersey is proud that his career in the sport brought him back to the league, as he now looks to build off of what his team accomplished in his first campaign as a coach. With the addition of the Providence Hockey Club to the Central Division, Caglianone knows the battle to make it to the Frozen Finals is only getting tougher.
Hello, E-Show. Joining us for this week's installment of our Coach's Corner chat is New York Apple Corps head coach and general manager Lenny Caglianone. Coach Caglianone just finished his first season behind the bench in the EHL after a season leading the New Jersey Titans of the NA3HL. He is a product of the league, finishing up his junior career as captain of the New Jersey Rockets before a hockey career that also saw him wear the C for Westfield State. Coach, we thank you for joining us today.
Jake, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure, man.
So first off, last year and this time of year for this interview, you said that coming to the EHL was a no-brainer for you. So would you say this year was able to live up to expectations?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think when you think about the comparison of Tier 3 hockey, right, and you look at some of the other circuits that are around, especially throughout the East Coast, right, I think the EHL is very far and above their competition. They know their demographic. They're very functional. They're very efficient. And cosmetically, the league is extremely attractive. And most of all, the D3 commitments that are pumped out of the league should be for a player. If you're realistic, you should be able to come there and know that if you perform consistently on any given night, there's going to be eyes in the building. There's going to be eyes on the screen. And it's going to be a lot easier to secure yourself that collegiate spot. Especially in this tumultuous time of having, you know, the clearinghouse and the portal and everything of that nature kind of backlogging the movement and traffic of Division 3 and Division 1. The AHL has that solidified demographic that, you know, as a collegiate coach, you could go and pick and pluck and get a very good product that'll for sure help your team.
And it was your first year as general manager, so dealing with more of the player movement and all that kind of stuff on that side of things. So what were your impressions of being on the administrative side?
Yeah, I mean, to be completely transparent, the efficiency, once again, to use that word, was right up there as bar none. And to have some of the openness and support of some of the other coaches in the league through guys that I myself had played against when they were behind the bench, when I was in the league as a player, and then to also have the support of, you know, ownership with Steve as well. And he's been great. He's enabled me to do a lot of things and make sure that I put the team in a place to succeed. And then in comparison, right, we just made the jump leaving USA Hockey, and the system over there to kind of get things done on the administrative side is a little bit drawn out. It's a little bit tougher just to get, you know, kind of your ducks in order and make sure that you check all the boxes. But with the league on this end, with the player movement, everything's very open. It's very fluid, and it's extremely efficient. And it makes my life a little bit easier to juggle maybe some of the administrative aspects along with the coaching duties.
Apple Corps is a team that has a lot of history. And you touched on this in last year's interview, that every team is going to have peaks and valleys. So getting into, you know, this past season, how much pressure do you put on yourself for getting the team back to some of the higher levels in the past?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that you have to acknowledge is the history, right? And the team has certainly gone through, in a macro sense, the peaks and valleys of an organization. The hockey realm in general continuously goes through this revolving door trend of where players are going, where your pulling players from. But I think this is the first time we've seen this major and extensive expansion of teams that players could go to, right? Maybe you're a Midwest kid, and geographically now you don't have to come to the East Coast. You could stay over in some of the offerings that are over there now with the expansion of the NCDC West. So going through some of these peaks and valleys, you have to understand that as a program, you're going to have to reinvent yourself. You're going to have to coin a little bit of a different identity, right? And you're going to have to change with the times. If you don't evolve and adapt, then you're essentially archaic, and you'll be extinct in a matter of time. So the pressure to really overcome maybe some of those shortcomings in the past seasons, I don't really say it's pressure. It's more of a learning process. You don't lose, you only learn. And for me, the biggest thing is just understanding that there's things that you can and can't control. And for me, I have to control some of those things that I can. And I have to just allow the other things to grow organically or happen organically that I can. And that's something that's the beauty of the game. You can only go out there and make sure you guys are prepared, and make sure you take care of the administrative side, and put yourself out there to ensure that you get a good crop of players and get a good flow of players into your program.
You brought up identity, and that's kind of the perfect word, is that you guys built a reputation this year on being a tough, hard-nosed hockey team, hard to play against. So was that kind of your message from the get-go this year?
Yeah, I think in regards to the situation, right, coming into the program last year, coming off the heels of what the season was prior to this season, and the returning core that we only had, I believe, 3 players on the roster from last year. Of that, maybe there was 45 to 50 EHL man games between those guys. And you look at those guys and you try not to put a heavy burden on them, right? And bringing over some of the guys and bringing in some of the guys that I had to fill some of the spots on the team and in the short amount of time. The only thing that you can do is just reiterate that being hard-nosed, playing the game efficiently and honestly, right? And playing the game in a physical sense, heavy and hard, those are the things that translate to every level. You never not see someone on a team at the next level who doesn't play heavy and hard. That's the identity that always translates in that regard. So having a new roster with 20 something identities that have never played together, that have been in that room, it's super, super important that you just reiterate and project things that are going to translate, and that's something that does, playing that heavy hard game. And it's something that's appealing to guys at the next level, especially collegiately.
And you touched on the guys that you brought over that you were with at the NA3 level with the Titans, Dickinson, Salas, Morelli, Donnie Alfama. So how do you think that adjustment process was for those guys?
Yeah, I mean, listen, certainly a lot of those guys had great pedigrees. They had great resumes. And to come in and be in a league where it is predominantly age out heavy, and there's certainly a certain way that the game is played, you only hope for guys to latch on to some of the ideologies that are in the room. You try to insulate the room with a positive message, and you try to make sure that those guys have an easy transition. But I think first and foremost, you have to have a very clear identity. I think it falls back on that consistently. So having the day-to-day stuff laid out, having a clear-cut message, a clear-cut identity, that allows for some of those guys to ease that transition. And I think those players in particular certainly had some of their positive moments and their negative moments, but it's a learning process. You don't lose, you only learn, and you have to be a better player than you were the day before. And that just comes with all the small details, right? The preparation and things like that. And the way the room was ran and the program was ran was extremely professional. So it gave guys a good springboard to have their own identity and to know what was expected of them.
So you touched on how you didn't have a lot of EHL man games coming in terms of returning players, but there were a number of guys on your team that did come from other junior leagues. So did you kind of view that as an asset? Did they bring some sort of veteran presence there, even if it wasn't from the EHL?
Yeah, for sure. I think, it's tough to talk about things like this in regards to when you're jumping league to league, right? But the one thing that you get, regardless of where you're playing, when you're playing juniors, you get that seasoning, and bringing some of those guys in that have that seasoning, right? And unfortunately, we don't have an EHLP team, so I don't have this demographic, this audience to pull from that already knows the culture with inside the room. And I think that's maybe something that we struggled with a bit this year, was some of that leadership to steer the boat, right? But those guys coming in that had that prior experience knew some sort of flavor that I was going to bring, right? But it's a totally different setting, so it calls for totally different, ideologies and approaches. And guys were good enough that, some of the room was held together by guys having that prior experience with myself and knowing the junior landscape as well. So it definitely helped us in some of the tougher stretches, but for sure, those guys rose to the occasion. I tip my cap to them, day in and day out, dealing with some of the tough times. Like I said, it's every day is not easy. No one wants to go to the rink when you're in that foxhole, but it's those guys that are going to pull you out of it.
So yeah, at times goals were hard to come by. So what helped keep morale during those tougher stretches for the Apple Corps?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. To sit there and not, highlight maybe some of the shortcomings that we had. Putting pucks in the net was certainly one of the issues that we had, and to be, pragmatic about the situation and make sure that you're thermostating that and trying to get the puck in the net. You're always trying to find new ways to reinvent the approaches. And I think for me, one of the big things that I relied on was the flavor of practice, having some of those small area games to maybe jumpstart some guys' creativity and allow them to understand that, you do have the ability to put the puck in the net. And I think that's a huge thing that, the demographic and audience coming up it's the confidence thing. We have a lot of guys who, aren't hyper concerned with their situation per se. And they look at maybe some of the noise that is outside of the room. And there was always a consistent message like, listen, at the end of the day, yeah, our face value wise, are we maybe struggling, but so are some of the other teams. And then there's a lot of other narratives that occur within those locker rooms that we don't know about. And the biggest thing that we could do is just keep our head down and cut the noise out. We're here to do a job. And I tip my cap again to a lot of these guys that trusted me and understood that, hey, listen, there's no fooling anybody. We're in a rebuild. We know what we need to do. And we certainly have a tough task ahead of us. But like I said, it's you really have to find the ways to reinvent the atmosphere and the environment and keep guys fresh and keep them interested. And I think a lot of that was really falling back on some of the small area games to show guys that there is a enjoyment aspect that you could get out of the game. Not everything has to be so morbid and redundant with some of the drills that we do. So like I said, you try to insulate that room with some of that flavor and that jump.
So you mentioned confidence, and I'm curious, when you have a team like you had that is one of the youngest in the league, despite playing in some prior junior hockey, they were among the youngest. Was confidence part of the learning curve for a lot of those guys this year?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. And maybe some of the things that worked in other leagues and other settings, they don't necessarily translate to the EHL, but it's about, having that once again pragmatic approach to understand that maybe some things do and don't work, and you need to find that middle ground. And even as a coach, right? Like, I don't claim to know everything. I'm very fresh in regards to being at the helm, and I'm continuously growing. So finding maybe my identity as well, and evolving and adapting, you have to make sure that you show growth. And for me, right, the times are continuously changing. There's the player that we saw maybe 10, 15 years ago is not a player that lives in the game today. So you have to be completely transparent. At least that's my approach, and show these guys, listen, I'm in the trenches with you too. Just as much as you're growing, I'm growing as well. And, it's a learning process for everybody involved. And that's a very big thing is to have transparency. The days of playing for a guy who certainly just wears the jacket those are so, it's outdated. It's outdated and it's defunct, and that attitude and that flavor is dead. And I try to bring something a little bit more personalized and personable in that sense, and to show these guys, listen, you have to have that confidence continuously to go through these games and say, hey, listen, if we're playing a top end team, there's things that we could fall back on that we're better at than them. we continuously have been in these situations where maybe we're behind, and fortunately enough for us, right, maybe some of the times we didn't show up to the dance, but I think when we did, it was always against those top teams. We always played better games against those top teams because we knew the weight of it. Where maybe we got a little too comfortable sometimes, where our confidence was, overabundant, and we were like, hey, we could just take off maybe 2 or 3 shifts. And I always was very big on telling those guys, listen, you take those 2 to 3 shifts off. Maybe you do, maybe he does. And that 30 seconds adds up to maybe 10, 15 minutes throughout the game. And that's when you lose those small battles. And that's what it's about, is just gaining the confidence through some of those small interactions, whether it be, simple as your first passes or as heavy as putting the puck in the net, which we just touched on. So, certainly was an issue, but you got to make sure that you're transparent and you're personable.
So you gave me a perfect segue to start talking about you a little bit, getting to know you more. So you actually played in the league when it was known as the EHL, one of very few coaches, although we have had few that played in the prior leagues, but you're actually an EHL guy. So how different was the league? And you said that, the players that people look for were different 10, 15 years ago. So it was 10 years ago. So how different would you say the league was?
Yeah, I mean, listen, certainly the culture has changed. I mean, let's not dance around the concept that the world is consistently becoming more politically correct, right? So we have to thermostat that as well. And certainly we're very lucky that hockey has a very intact and consistent culture, but also at the same time, it's you see the jettison of fighting. That's not something that lives in our game anymore. Whether you're for it or against it, certainly when I jumped into juniors at 13, 14 years old, that was something that you had to live with during the game, that you could lose games no matter how skilled or intellectually, capable you were of playing the game and thinking it, and what speed. There was always that physicality, that fighting aspect that could deter you from some of the things that you wanted to accomplish. And I think that as you progress a little bit more, you'll see that aspect of the game is the biggest thing that's missing. And I'm not saying you should go out there and fight every time, but the physicality aspect, you see a lot of guys who want to float a lot more and who want to play in the soft areas, and who not necessarily want to be more efficient, but they want to strike when it's comfortable for them. And you consistently have to be in all hard areas of the game. And there's an efficiency aspect again to that, but I think that's the biggest thing. You'll see guys who are able to do some of the things that they do because there's no thermostat out there in regards to the physical aspect. And certainly the game has evolved for better or for worse. And for me, I certainly think it's evolved in a very positive and north trend, but you're seeing maybe the way the game is policed as well on the official side is a little too heavy and tight on the whistle. And that's the biggest thing that you're going to see in the difference is there's just a certain ideology that when you stepped on the ice maybe 10, 15 years ago, the accountability level was a lot higher. And now it's certainly it's something that has removed itself from the game. But again, the times they're going to evolve, and you have to adapt. If you don't adapt and you don't reinvent or tweak and thermostat who you are as a coach and who you are as a team, you're going to get left behind. And thankfully enough, I'm young enough where I still think I played in that transition. I caught it at the tail end of my collegiate game and my junior game. But it's a totally different atmosphere in game. I would say the atmosphere is the biggest thing.
So as a coach and a player that didn't play very long ago, you could obviously relate to your players in that way. Was it tough for you to kind of make that adjustment from the style you played to a different style to coach?
I think that goes for anybody. If anybody tells you different, they're lying to you, because you have that passion and that flame as a player, and you can't let your emotions fly off the handle. And for me, being a guy who was going to play on both ends of the ice and assert themselves in a physical manner as well, stick up for your teammates, you necessarily can't do that as a coach. So you find yourself constantly keeping your emotions in check. And I am I'm an emotional guy. I think all the guys are that love the game and get behind the bench. It's because there's a lot still left there emotionally, and to get behind the bench and know that you have to be the guy who sets the tone so to speak, in regards to the direction and path you want to go. You have to understand that once again, it all falls back to being adaptive and evolving. And it's certainly something that you have to be, constantly troubleshooting. You have to make sure that you're doing the correct and necessary things to evolve as an identity. And I think sometimes that's where you see a lot of the guys fall short, is that the things that they were doing when they played don't necessarily translate to the game today. So it's an ever evolving process. And if you're reluctant or against it, you're really not gonna overcome some of the hurdles and situations that you find yourselves in throughout the season.
And with your junior and college career not being long ago at all, you mentioned last year how that would sort of help you not only like coach your players, but help mentor your players as well. So, how did you see that come to fruition this year?
Yeah, I mean, you see guys who were closer to your age, right? Being a younger guy, you see these guys who are a couple years younger than you, and you can only look back and say, you know what, I went through the same process, and certainly so the path was a little bit clearer, right? 10 years ago, you don't have all these leagues, you don't have all these locations that you could necessarily stay closer to home with, right? So you have to go out and get uncomfortable and find that comfort level in areas that are particularly unknown. So now having that experience, and you go to some of these guys and you say, hey, listen, I was right there. I went through the same issues, same problems. I went through the collegiate circuit as well. These are the things that are going to help you at this next level. I've been there. My skates were in that room. I was sitting in that stall that you were sitting in. So I think that guys see a younger face and they see a little bit of an older school mentality in the way that I approach the game. So I believe it's a good middle ground for these guys to relate to. But certainly so, my big thing is my approach with coaching is that you have to speak to the majority while acknowledging the minority. Whether it's an individual player, a small group of players, that's certainly something that I try to approach. And let's face it, at this day and age, at the tier 3 level, at the EHL level, would you like to go out and grab every guy that you have eyes for? I mean, of course, you'd be lying to everybody, but you have to take what's available for you and what fits in the league. And you have to be realistic. So maybe you don't necessarily get the guys that you want, but you get the guys that buy into your program. You want to bring in those right guys. So having that relatable and personable approach certainly is going to allow for you guys to be optimal.
So when you played juniors, looking at some of your pit stops, you played primarily with the Rockets, but you did get to play some non-games with the Wichita Falls Wildcats. So as an East Coast guy for most of your career, what was the culture shock of being down south?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly different. I had played a little bit of prep hockey out in Minnesota, so I kind of got that Midwest appeal. And listen, I grew up in New York, so it's a little bit of a culture shock there, and that started a little bit earlier. And then coming back to the Rockets to play on the East Coast, a little bit more at home with the attitude and the flavor of the game. And then you go down south where you're in, arenas and you're playing in front of fans and stuff like that. And it certainly was a culture shock. And that was right around when the Jersey Shore was blowing up and, you had Hurricane Sandy. So everybody thinks that you're right in the middle of everything and those people are your next door neighbors. So it was different. But it certainly fit my style of playing in the South. And, it was a great experience. And the biggest thing that I'll touch on with that is that, listen, not every situation is the right situation. Just because you play in a certain league, it doesn't guarantee you anything. You're not entitled to anything. And, it was something where, hey, it wasn't beneficial to me and I enjoyed the experience, but I needed to go somewhere where, I could play and develop. And I think that's something that guys really miss a beat on now is, hey, listen, it's not where you're playing, it's who you're playing for. It's what you're playing for. And that's certainly the most important thing. And, you don't develop unless you get in-game reps and you get that experience. And some guys would rather just be on the sideline and merely be a passenger when realistically you have to be driving the bus in your situation, in your narrative. And then that's not saying you don't compromise for the majority or, you be a guy who's resistant to growth. You just have to make sure that the situation is right for you. But certainly a culture shock in regards to, the speed of life down there. The East Coast is a very fast-paced life, and the South maybe you're able to kick your feet up a little bit more.
I really like the point you just made about players looking for, not necessarily what's the best for them, but what might be the best optically. So, as a coach in tier 3, how hard is that to convey to an average player who's looking to maybe go to a higher level that it might not be the best fit for them?
Yeah, I mean, and that certainly you could fall back on some of the other, topics that we touched on and my personal experience. It's like, listen, I played in the North American League, right? I played in the EJ, which is NCDC now, and those situations were great, right? They were great optically for your resume, but at the end of the day, if you're not playing some of those games and you're not getting in those in-game reps, what are you really doing? How are you advertising yourself? How are you marketing yourself as a player? And some guys are so caught up in the narrative that, hey, I need to be here to get this notoriety or this respect from my peers. And it's like, what are some of the biggest success stories that you have from players who make it to the collegiate Division I level or the NHL or the pros? It's like a lot of those guys take unconventional, roads. And I'm a big guy on the fact that the road that you take, whether it's long, short, or in between, it seasons you as a traveler, and it gives you experiences that you won't necessarily get taking the easy one or taking the path less traveled, right? Guys need to be realistic with their identity and realistic with their skill set and their toolbox, and certainly so. You'll see it. We get guys who commit to NESCAC schools and other conferences within Division III that have players that played in higher leagues, and at the end of the day, that guy who played maybe 100 to 150 man games in the AHL is going to have a better developmental process than the guy who played minimal games at another level. And I think it comes with a lot of oversaturation. It's tough to really place yourself in regards to where am I going to be the most optimal. And I think that's the biggest thing. And, that's something that's polluted our game. I think at the junior level, regardless of where you're playing, listen, you need to be realistic. And sometimes people in that authority position are reluctant to be honest with these guys. And that's something that I try to be completely transparent, whether it's what you want to hear, it's what you need to hear. And there's certain ways to go about that, but there's nothing wrong with playing in a league that's going to provide you the most reps in game and in the real game situations.
Perfectly put. So after your junior career, you finished up as a captain with the Rockets in the EHL and then moved on to Westfield State, where you ended up wearing the A in your 4th year and then the C by your 5th year. So was leadership always kind of part of the identity that you built for yourself?
Yeah, I think so for sure. And it's not something where I was like, hey, I want to go in and be a captain and this is the role that I want to take. Thankfully, all those years that I played at both programs, I had a great group of guys that always believed in what we wanted to do, always believed in me. And it just something that happened organically. And thankfully it did, and it helped me grow as a human being first and foremost, right? Like the whole point of playing the game is, right, you want to get to where you want to go, but you also want to grow as a person. And taking some of those years, right, outside of that predominantly overage season, once you get out of the high school setting, right, and you're 18, 19, 20, and then 20, 21, you learn how to manage personalities, whether it's in a micro or a macro sense. And I think for me, like I said, I had a lot of good coaches. Bob Thornton, who works with us at Westchester, who was my coach for the years that I spent at the Rockets, Bob Mealy at Westfield State. Those guys were patient with me in regards to, managing that room and what we wanted to accomplish. And I know it's kind of cliche, but being a captain, I'm nowhere now if I didn't have some of those guys in that room that enabled me to kind of inject my own flavor and try to help the team as much as I can. It's not just a sole identity, right? It's show me the people that you're surrounded with, and I'll show you who you are as a person. And I had great teammates along that span and that time frame.
So after college, it was a few pit stops in the pros for you: Evansville, Roanoke, and Huntsville in the SP, and then Danbury at the Fed. So for you, you're a criminal justice major. Was the goal always to stay in hockey?
Yeah, I mean, Listen, I think people are so reluctant to re-immerse themselves in the game because they think if they didn't particularly quote unquote make it, right? You didn't make it Division 1, you didn't make it to the pros, you didn't make it, to the top tier, you didn't make it to the NHL. That's it. The game is done. But listen, you've been doing this for your entire life, right? To go back and restart on something new, and to kind of relinquish all those years that you gave, for me was it just wasn't realistic. It wasn't functional. The plan was to go in and use that criminal justice degree, but there was an opportunity that presented itself, and it's, what do I see myself being most happy with? And I've known the game for so long, and a lot of with some of the other guys that are in my position. And you want to give back, and you want to tell these guys, hey, listen, maybe you need to put your arm around one of the kids and just tell them, listen, we've all been there. This is how you're going to do it, instead of just watching it from afar and allowing these guys to fall down a couple of times. You need to be the guy who's going to pick these players back up. And I think that's the biggest thing, culture shift wise, is that you need to tell these guys what they're doing wrong, and you need to present the situation for them to find their way out of that. And I think that's the biggest thing. And certainly playing pro and being in some of those rooms was something. And I'll be honest, you can't hide behind anything. I wasn't particularly ready for it because I wasn't prepped for it. And you learn as you go. And it was a tough, 2 years to be a part of that and learning some of those ways. But I met a tremendous amount of guys and personalities that helped me now coaching wise, that I wouldn't have met if I didn't take that journey or try to go on that, that stint there. But it's a different animal once you get to that level, right? It's more reminiscent of what juniors was, that 10 to 15 years ago, where now you could take some of those experience and say, hey, listen, this is what the other side of the room looks like. And you just try to be the best, not only coach, but the best human being for your players. You want to be a good human being first and foremost. And some of those settings, whether they be good, bad, or indifferent, have helped mold me to really give my best to these guys. And I think that's the biggest thing. Some guys get behind the bench for maybe some of the wrong reasons. But for me, getting behind the bench was just to see myself in some of these players' positions and to say, hey, listen, we've been there. I've been there. This is what I did, and it didn't work out for me. And this is what you should do, so you find yourself in a better position. But certainly great places to play. Huntsville was awesome. Roanoke was awesome. Evansville was great. And then, the little stop in Danbury, which is ironic, certainly helped me understand that, listen, the game isn't guaranteed and nothing's guaranteed. And you have to be, appreciative of where you are and where the game is taking you. And it certainly allowed me to explore so many venues and circuits. And it's only, once again, seasoned me for who I am. And it's helped me, I think, at least be a better coach for my guys and the guys that'll come in the future.
So that desire to give back has brought you to behind the Apple Court bench. So we'll look ahead to the upcoming season now. And you said the whole Danbury thing, an affiliation was announced a couple months ago between Apple Court and the Danbury Hat-Tricks of the NAHL, which you are now a scout for. So how did that come about, and why do you think it's going to benefit the Apple Court organization?
Yeah, I think you could go back, and there's a multifaceted way to answer this question, but I think overall, you look at the history of the team, right? Some of the alumni that we have, the big time alumni that you could go back and look and touch on. And for me, like I said, I spent a considerable amount of time in the Rockets organization, had the pleasure and the ability to play with really good hockey players. Charlie McAvoy, Jeremy Bracco, Kevin LeBay, Zach Aston Reese, and you look at some of those guys, and those guys came in a little bit younger than probably we're allowed to today, because we know we have that 16 rule, right? And we had guys coming in at 14, 15, myself included, and watching some of these guys develop and creating an atmosphere and environment that allowed them to get that professional taste, so that it'll springboard them or fast track their development. For me, it was a no-brainer, right? We want to create a situation that's fluid, that's transparent, that is going to allow guys to come in at a younger age, be in a better league, right? Junior-wise, where you have that older demographic. And once again, we touched on it. Some of the top guys in the league are going to some of these schools that the North American League guys are going into. So you're getting maybe more reps at this level than you would anywhere else, but you're also getting that professional atmosphere, being on the ice consistently day in and day out, having your schedule laid out. So having that transparency at our level, and creating an environment where there will be some transitional aspect. Hey, if you perform here, there is an end game, where sometimes there isn't an end game in other organizations. And you're kind of just saying, hey, well, what's next year? At least you have that tangibility with us in regards to saying, if I perform here, I know that there's eyes that are going to allow me and enable me to get to that next level, and certainly, gives us some weight in the developmental aspect. I know that the league is predominantly overager, and I know we touched on that, but what's wrong with going back and creating an environment that has a pedigree that pushes guys to the next level and that creates that atmosphere? And I think it's a flavor that's considerably new in this circuit, but like I said, when I was coming up, and some of those names I mentioned were in the same situation that I want to bring some of these guys into. And I think it brings a different appeal and cosmetic approach to the league that maybe has been lost. So certainly touching back on that revolving door, that those trends do come back through. And some of the oversaturation has helped considerably with that. We see programs popping up left and right. And it's like, do you go to the program that's going to be cosmetically attractive just because you have the name attached to you? You go somewhere where there's an end game and you're going to get the development and the concentration on your personal development and growth.
So that appeal, you said, has not been lost on the apple core, because one of the virtues of having a younger team is having a good amount of returners, and you guys have certainly secured that just so far. Trevor Carman, Jesse Dickinson, Sammy Lamphere, Riley Shepard, Joe Harrison, the college EHL All-Star College Series. He was in your EHL All-Star Classic, one of your selections there. Nick Sweet, who was also your top scorer. So how nice is it? How much of a luxury is it to have that kind of bevy of returners for next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think returner-wise, we did really good. And there's, a couple other guys that are coming back as well that we have yet to announce. And I think that's a process that you want to take slowly, right? And not come out of the gate hot. And listen, you could, once again, I think my brand is built on honesty and transparency, and to have a returning core like this year that we didn't have last year is going to help a considerable amount. What's expected of you. The nucleus that comes in the room is going to be so intact, and they're going to be able to troubleshoot some of those issues that maybe we didn't have those guys who were able to circumvent some of the small narratives that were in the room, and that happens with every single team. But yeah, certainly helps us and gives us that core that we didn't have last year. Once again, we don't have that EHLP program that we could pull from, right? And I think going out and going through that spin cycle of getting another 20 odd something guys to come in with no foundation, it's one of the things that is a key ingredient for success. And certainly now the optimism is a lot higher, right? There's still a job that needs to be done. We're in year 2 of this 3 to 4 year plan where we want to get in and reinvent and make sure we have the amenities and the cosmetic appeal that is going to be able to bring guys in. And that's one of the key foundations. And all those guys are incredible human beings, incredible hockey players, and they have the backing and the confidence of myself and the rest of the staff to go out and finish the job that was kind of left unsaid. And I think you see where we were at last year, once again, to touch on it, just to give these guys a little bit more of recognition. Coming in with all these different identities from different programs, you kind of you expect for the worst, right? And you hope for the best. And once again, you'd be lying if you didn't have that approach. But you look at some of the other teams that had 2 to 3 year guys that were returning, whether it was 5, 6, 4. We didn't have that. We didn't have that, and this year we do. So it creates a little bit of a different expectation. And certainly those guys going through maybe their first or second years in the league, all of them being their first, you now know what to expect when you walk into that room come September.
So it is off-season time. Some coaches say it's their favorite time of the year. Others aren't crazy about it. So where do you stand on it? What do you enjoy or not enjoy most about this time of year?
Yeah, I think that a lot of guys, they take different approaches. They have different functionalities when it comes to this time of the year. And for me, the biggest thing is, you don't stop working until the day is done, not the work. And for me, at the end of the day, you want to be efficient with your time, and you want to be smart with it, but consistently and constantly being in rinks and making sure that you're informed in regards to the next crop of players that's coming up. You're informed with some of, the assets that you have in the hockey community to provide you with some good information. I think it's super important to consistently be available, and whether or not you want to admit it, or some of the other personalities want to admit it in hockey in general, you have to be on the pulse 24/7. And I think every coach in this league, has done a tremendous job of making themselves available and extending themselves in times of, that quote unquote downtime where guys will maybe take some time off. There's personalities in this league behind the bench they're tremendous, and it contributes and constitutes to the league. You have a lot of these guys who want to go out, they want to hunt, they're doing the pre-draft, they're doing the Chowder Cup, they're making sure they're making themselves available consistently, and it's just a testament to the rest of the league and why we have what I would say this stronghold approach on pushing guys to the next level. It's super important, and certainly for me, it's a great time. Hockey's, like I said, it's expanding. There's a lot of oversaturation, but the way you get to know the landscape is you don't just say you know it and watch a couple of games. You go out there and you get boots on the ground, and that's a big ideology for me, is getting boots on the ground and doing the hard work. You don't get anything accomplished by taking that easy road. We talked about being a traveler who goes on some of those longer roads, and you get the seasoning, you get the experience. So I think that's a huge part. If you're not working in the off season, you're not working in the regular season. That's the creed there.
Well, Coach, thank you so much for your time. Good luck in the rest of the off season, and we can't wait to see you at the September showcase this upcoming year.
For sure. Listen, Jake, I appreciate everything that you do. You're a bright spot in the league, and certainly your personality is one that brings so much flavor to the league, and it's great to see a younger guy come in and be so passionate about it. And I would also like to thank everybody in the league, and first and foremost Neil and Joe and the process they allow us to go through, and how professionally it's done. And honestly, there's no other league that I would rather be a part of at this point in my coaching career, and everybody's great, and tip my cap to everybody involved, and certainly excited for this season.
We appreciate that, Coach, and the best part of it is that we have coaches like you, like everybody else in this league, that just care, and that makes the biggest difference. So we thank you again for taking the time today, and good luck.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it, Jake.
Thanks for listening to The E-Show. Learn more at easternhockeyleague.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Also, be sure to subscribe and get notified when next week's podcast is released.